Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining today for our webinar, LookMa No Password, Multi-Factor Authentication and Going Passwordless. Next slide, please. Just a few notes before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available to everyone who is registered on our website. You'll receive an email with the recording as well. And at any time, please feel free to use the Q&A chat box to ask questions of our panelists, and we'll have time at the end for Q&A. Next slide. So let's get started. Today we have two speakers, Lisa Plagmeyer, the Executive Director at the National Cybersecurity Alliance, and Abby Guha, the VP of Product Marketing at Yubico. So I'll turn it over to Lisa Plagmeyer to get us started.
Thanks, Jen. Hi, everybody. So a little bit about the National Cybersecurity Alliance. Simply said, we empower a more secure, interconnected world. So we are all about trying to educate people to keep ourselves, our families, and our organizations secure. We get about 2 million views on our website a year, StaySafeOnline.org, what I like to call the world's best URL. We have about 400,000 people that follow us on social media, so we'd invite you to join them there. And we have hundreds of articles and resources available on our website, and lots of webinars like this one that thousands of people attend every year. So welcome. We want to talk a little bit today. We're going to start the conversation by referring to some research that we did last year that we're conducting again this year. It's in process right now, that we call OBehave. We surveyed 3,000 people in the US, the UK, and Canada. And if you're a security professional attending this today, you might find the data interesting, and you can download the complete report on StaySafeOnline.org. It's basically a behavioral science look at cybersecurity, at humans and our interaction with technology, and why we do some of the things we do. So this is the behavioral science model. It's known as COM-B. And all this says is that you need capability, motivation, and opportunity before you do a behavior. Capability is all about knowledge. We're going to give you some knowledge today. Opportunity is having the time and place to do something. And then motivation is, I think, the hardest part. That's very emotional in nature. So because of that emotional component, we asked people in our survey how they feel about cybersecurity. Seth Godin is an advertising guru out there who's got a really interesting website with a lot of intelligent things to say. He says facts don't change people's behavior, emotion changes people's behavior. And he's coming at that from the perspective of a lifetime career in the ad industry, the advertising industry. But I think this holds true for our behaviors with technology and security, and specifically, we have to be emotionally motivated to do something before we do it. So we're going to start by asking you guys some of the same questions that we asked the general public in our survey. So get your fingers ready. We're going to have some poll questions, and we're going to start with one about your feelings. Bet you didn't expect this in a webinar today about authentication. But get ready. We want to know what you think, and then we're going to see how your answers compare to the public. So one of the questions we asked was, staying secure online is under my control. We would like you to rate this today. You'll see a poll question now on your screen. Just click and give us your answer. Do you strongly disagree with this statement? Do you strongly agree with this statement? Or are you somewhere in between? This idea of feeling like something's under our control is really, really important. If we don't think that we have control over something, then we're probably not going to do anything. If we don't think what we do matters, we're not going to take any action. And so that's one of the reasons that we ask this question. It can be really demotivating. If you don't think what you do matters, then that's super demotivating. You're probably not going to do anything. So Jen, how is it looking? Do we have a fair number of responses? You want to display the results? There we go. So 56% of you agree with this statement, which I think is really good, especially compared to the public. We'll look at that next. 16% disagree or strongly disagree. Oh, sorry, I read this differently. Yeah, no, 56% agrees. Thank you. It's under your control. Another 14% strongly agree. So the vast majority of people, you put those two together, and you folks really think that you can actually do something about this. This is really, really good. Only 15% were ambivalent about this. So let's look at what the general public said. Not as encouraging results as you all. So the most popular answer was people that were ambivalent. They weren't sure about this at all. And again, that's a problem. We're not sure. We're probably not going to do anything about it because we don't know that what we do really matters. So there definitely are things you can do to take control, and we're going to talk about that next. But glad to see that you guys realize that what you do matters. So we also asked people about their security behaviors, and we're going to ask you some more questions. We're going to drill down on a few of the behaviors that are relevant to the topic today. The first one is passwords, and maybe more broadly, authentication in general. What is the typical length of your passwords? Is it 6 characters or less, 7 to 8 characters, 9 to 11, or 12 or longer? How long are your passwords typically? And I'll pause for a moment while you guys answer this poll question. Be honest, we're not tracking it. We can't see your answers. What is the typical length of your passwords? All right, let's see what you guys think. Okay, I think this is a tech-savvy bunch on this call today. 61% of you said 12 characters or more, so that's fantastic. I wish the general public's numbers looked as good. The next most popular answer was 9 to 11 characters. 7 to 8, that's getting pretty short, and nobody confessed to having really short passwords of 6 characters or less, so that's good. This is what it looked like for the general public. As you can imagine, the numbers weren't quite as edifying, so only 16% said 12 or longer. The most popular answer was 9 to 11, which I can live with. I can sleep at night with that number. But the 36% who said 7 to 8 and the 2% that said 6 or fewer, that makes it a little harder for me to sleep. Next poll question for you. How often do you use unique passwords for your important accounts? So that could be email, social media, of course, anything financial related. Never, sometimes, half the time, most of the time, or all the time. And again, nobody's watching. Be honest. How often do you use unique passwords for your important online accounts? Truly unique, not following a system that you kind of made up in your head where you just change a few characters every time. I've even had people tell me that they have a system that they use where there's actually a few characters from the URL that they're on in the password, which kind of made me cringe. But it's their system. It's how they remember them all. So 49% of you said all the time. That's fantastic. 31% said most of the time. Only 9% said half of the time, and 11% sometimes. So we have a bunch on this call with good habits. That's really good to see. We're going to contrast that with what the general public said. Only a third of them said all the time, 31% most of the time, 20% half the time, 3% confessed to never. These numbers actually were a really good increase in 2022 over 2021. So I think why is it so important that we use unique passwords, that we don't just change a character? Then why does this matter? A lot of us, I think, years ago, I know before I got into security, you think of a password that meets all the rules. It's long and it's complex and it's got uppercase, lowercase, numbers, special characters, all these things, and you can also remember it. So what do? You use it over and over again. It's people even say, "Oh, that's my password," because it's the password you use on everything. It wasn't until somebody explained to me that passwords used in one breach if stolen in a breach can be used to get into other accounts. So back in the day when I had a Yahoo account, and years later the Yahoo breach happened, I thought, who cares? I don't have anything in my Yahoo account that's of any value at all. I haven't logged into it myself in a million years. And what I didn't realize is that, okay, that was a pretty big breach that involved usernames and passwords. And that was kind of a gold mine because just because of the sheer numbers of users and this bad habit that we have of reusing passwords. So it's good that a lot of you don't have that habit on this call. I wish less of the folks in our study had this habit, but we will be asking that question year after year. So we'll be looking for trends in that data. So, okay, in general, I think we can kind of agree that passwords are kind of a failure, that they were fine in the beginning of the internet. They're not fine anymore. They haven't worked. We developed bad habits around them, and they just aren't really keeping us secure like they were originally intended. So we ask people, to use long passwords. We ask them to use complex passwords. We ask them to use unique ones, as we've talked about. So then we also ask people, like, how do you keep track of all these things? If we're telling you they have to be long, complex, and unique, when you think about the number of accounts we all have, like, that's a lot of passwords. Unfortunately, the most popular answer was I write them down in a notebook. Which you might think, okay, what's the risk of somebody coming into my house and getting a hold of my password notebook? That seems pretty remote. The problem is I don't believe that you don't ever take it anywhere. You don't ever take it to the coffee shop or on vacation. And the thing I really don't like about that solution is the recovery from it is abominable. Like, if you think about what would happen if somebody got control of your accounts, everything you've got in a password notebook, some of your most important accounts. I mean, a lot of your password reset processes are tied to your email. So if somebody gets a hold of your email, they'll have an easier time compromising other accounts. So the recovery from it just would be a monumental task, and a lot of damage could be done in the meantime. So back to my point, the passwords are a bit of a failure, and the ways we keep track of them are not great either. So that's what makes multi-factor authentication so important. So we're going to ask you a question about MFA, just like we, or no, I don't have a poll question for this. We're going to share with you some of the data that we learned from the public. 43% of people said they'd never heard of MFA. I think it's because the name is pretty bad for the average American or average human to remember or to even know what it stands for. You'll find on our YouTube channel some man on the street videos that we did in San Francisco last summer with Yubico, asking people if they knew what MFA was, and there's some pretty entertaining and interesting content in those videos. Once you explain to people what it was, of the 57% who heard about it, 79% of them had used it at least once. And my favorite stat in probably the whole research report is that 94% of them said that they're still using it. We're creatures of habit. Once we enable something, we're probably not going to take the time to disable it. And so I was really encouraged to see that once you got people over the hump of using it, then they just kept doing it. It became a new habit. We also asked people, what, if any, behaviors have they changed as a result of any training that they've had? A lot of people of working age get training at work. So we asked them, did that influence you? Did it cause you to change any of your behavior? People said that they started using MFA when they understood what the dangers were of not using it. And they understood that passwords alone have been a bit of a failure. So I think for those of you today that don't use MFA of any kind, if we can get 40% of you to start using it as a result of this webinar today, I'd be absolutely thrilled. I'd feel like we were fulfilling our mission to keep everybody safe. If you do that, I can tell you the big upside is peace of mind. So rather than thinking about some hacker in a hoodie in a dark basement somewhere who's got all your passwords and is using them to try and get into a bunch of your accounts, MFA definitely gives you peace of mind, knowing that if your password's been compromised in a breach, you don't have to worry. I still recommend if you know that you do change your password, but at the end of the day, having more than one way for you to authenticate is the important thing, that multi-factor authentication. So that's some background for you today and some data. Thank you for participating in the poll. And now I'm going to turn it over. So I think I have to stop my share, right, guys? There we go. And I'd like to turn it over to Abby.
Thanks, Lisa. Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. Lisa gave us a really great overview on what we're seeing out there, the mindset and the evolving mindset. So I'm excited to come in and share with you the options that you have, the best practices. And for all of you guys who are attending this webinar, I'm not surprised that you feel that you have security under your control because you're here getting empowered with information. And as we know, information is power. So over the next 15 to 20 minutes or so, my goal, in keeping with the rest of the group here, is put this webinar together, is to empower you with information, to give you a sense of the choices that you have and the trade-offs, et cetera, so you can go off and make the right decision for your needs. So thanks, Lucas, for progressing my slides. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to start off with, and Lisa touched upon this, which is, the vast majority of breaches come from stolen credentials. And in cybersecurity, it can be very easy to live in the fear of space and anxiety, but really what we're about here collectively is about optimism and action, because there are choices out there and ways that you can mitigate risks. And yes, the cyber threat landscape is always evolving, but so are solutions to help mitigate those risks. So stolen credentials are at the base of a great number of breaches that you will have heard about, whether you're an individual or you're part of a company. It's in the news often. Next slide, please. One particular way of getting to those credentials is this notion of phishing. Many of you may already be familiar with this idea of phishing. It is a growing cyber threat, and it's basically the fraudulent practice of sending messages to the poor user on the other end that look very eerily like the actual thing. So you could get an email asking you to take an action, and then it feels very authentic. And oftentimes, malicious actors take advantage of some sort of vulnerability or fear that a user may have around a particular area. So during COVID, we saw cybercrime shoot up by 300%, according to the FBI, because people were getting emails that said, hey, download this ebook and keep yourself protected. And so, of course, the user goes to download something, or they're taken to a website, or they're told that, congratulations on this purchase that you've made. And you're like, I haven't made this purchase. So you go to the website that looks eerily familiar and accurate. You put in your username and passwords. And boom, now the malicious actor has your credentials. So phishing is a very popular way of getting to those credentials and very successful. So they've only proliferated over time. And username and passwords are often the credentials they're trying to get at. Next slide, please. And so phishing, it works. So it's no surprise that it's very lucrative for malicious actors. And of all the different ways that cybercrime can occur, phishing, vishing, farming, these are all sort of similar motions of getting to the user, getting the user to give over their credentials in a manner that the user doesn't realize at the time, to then have those credentials to be able to create havoc with on the other end and log into your other accounts, for example, and so on. One of the key takeaways from this session is that we want people to move away from passwords to other options that are more secure, more effective at mitigating these cyber risks. And almost anything you do outside of a password is a major step forward in your own strategy to protect your accounts. We'll switch into what the options are and the trade-offs are in just a bit. But phishing is one of the key things that you may have already experienced, or others that you might know, whether there be a friend or somebody in a company may have already experienced. Next slide, please. So passwords aren't great because they're easy targets for phishing, but what's better? Next slide. And that brings us to MFA, multi-factor authentication. Many of you who are more tech savvy may already be familiar with this acronym. As Lisa mentioned, a vast majority of people out there, and it also varies by regions. So certain regions on planet Earth are more familiar with MFA, have kind of moved further away from passwords versus other regions that may be lagging behind and are just coming into awareness of things that one can do beyond passwords. A multi-factor authentication is simply a combination of factors that help you identify yourself so that the service or the account that you're trying to log into can verify you accurately. So it can be a combination of what you know, what you have, and who you are. And any two or more of these three factors can be multi-factor. If you're only using one, that would be single factor. If you're using two, that could be considered two-factor authentication or even multi-factor authentication. So for those who are not familiar with this concept of MFA, a very simple example could be using your debit card to get cash out. So you go in, you have your card, something that you have, and something that you know, which is your PIN. And it's a combination of those two factors. Once you supply those, then you have access to your account. So that's long-standing, use of two or more factors. And that's what MFA is. Password is a very weak single factor. So if you move beyond that to multi-factor authentication, you're already in a much better place. An example of who you are could be things we've already been familiar with, using our face, an iris scan, or a fingerprint. These are all elements of us, things that make us unique that could also be in the mix. So biometric authentication is an example of that. Next slide, please. So any form of MFA is better than a password. However, not all MFA is created equal, and there are trade-offs to using one versus another. You'll see the two axes here, the X and the Y axis. Typically, there's always this natural tension that exists between the level of security that you have and the ease of use. And there are trade-offs. So for example, in the bottom section, username and password, we've already covered, not great, has been in existence in the 50s or 60s. Creates a barrier to entry for an account, but not really much of a barrier anymore. And then you've got software forms of MFA, mobile authentic MFA, using one-time passwords, much better than a password, but they're in the band where they can be phished. But either way, you can see username and password is very easy to use, very low levels of security. You kind of go to the top left-hand corner, smart cards, which you may have used, very high in security. However, they're more complex to implement. For an organization that involves putting in new infrastructure, users may have to carry around a smart card reader and other peripherals. So high security, a little bit more complex and possibly cumbersome. And the other options at the bottom here are somewhere in between. If you click again, you have a new category. This category of a solution has been around for some time now and picking up steam. And that is the idea of security keys, hardware security keys that are portable that you can take around with you, that are based on modern authentication protocols. You may have heard of FIDO, sort of the long version of it, but modern authentication protocols have been built to mitigate modern cybersecurity risks and threats. So when you think of all the options that you have, all of these are better than using passwords, even complex passwords. But hardware security keys based on modern FIDO and smart card protocols have been proven to stop account takeovers in their tracks by a lot of independent research. Next slide, please. So again, if you're using passwords today, we want you to move over to MFA, any type of MFA. However, even within the realm of MFA, certain MFA options are more phishable than others and can be easily bypassed. So we'll go to the next slide. This is just a smattering of some more recent, some organizations have been hit, organizations that we all know and love and use, have experienced even MFA being bypassed because of legacy MFA that has been used. And so that's just a phenomenon that we have seen start to pop up, and something I wanted to make you guys aware of. And I think the next slide kind of goes into how malicious actors bypass legacy MFA. So on the first click, we have our victim here who has received phishing email, and they're taken to a fake login page. So to the user, they don't know any different. Looks like a real email. They go to a website that seems about right, and they supply their credentials, their username and password. And so on the other end is the malicious actor that grabs those credentials and puts it into the real website, which of course the real website gets the real credentials, and then sort of kicks off the SMS. We've all gone through this process. Here's your 6-digit code. The victim gets it, none the wiser, supplies it. And that on the next click, the malicious actor supplies it to the fake website, thinking they're putting their SMS code into the real website. The user then the malicious actor grabs the SMS string and then actually puts into the real website, which is the last click here, and then they're in. So you can see how, even though the user thinks they're doing all the right things, they're getting the SMS code, they're providing it to the fake website, that SMS code is grabbed and then put into the real website. So that's a very straightforward, sad but straightforward way that malicious actors can grab MFA. Now, if you were using passwords, it works just the same. So this brings us to the adage that, we're using and we're seeing, we think that hackers hack into sites, but actually sometimes they just log in. They come in as a legitimate user who has unwittingly handed over their credentials. So it's not some brute force attack sometimes. It's just a very straightforward, we have your credentials, I'm going to log in as you into your organization, or if you're an individual, log into your account as you. Next slide, please. So, in terms of stopping phishing in its tracks, again, anything is better than a password. But if you're really going for sort of the more tried and true foolproof method, what has been proven over and over again to stop phishing and what is truly phishing resistant MFA are, if you click again, Lucas, is our hardware security keys based on FIDO and smart card protocols. There's a lot of independent research that has been done. And in fact, some compliance mandates now coming in that impact, of course, larger organizations that need to be compliant with certain regulations for their industry. The compliance mandates ask for phishing resistant MFA, and in some cases even go further to specify that you need to remove the reliance on the user and put in that kind of MFA that takes some of the guesswork, the human error out of the process so that phishing can be stopped, even without the user being aware and needing to be involved. Next slide, please. So this speaks to one such, mandate where, us as Yubico, we work a lot with standards bodies and have pioneered a lot of the open authentication protocols and have worked with government regulators and NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, to influence and put best practices in place. And NIST has, its latter part of last year, put in some of this language to say that phishing resistance is the ability of the authentication protocol to detect and prevent disclosure of authentication secrets, and is able to basically stop phishing without reliance on the vigilance of the subscriber. What that means is without reliance on you and I, if we're having a stressful day or a bad day and we get an email, we don't pay attention, removing the human error and vulnerability out of the equation. And really only FIDO2 and smart card based authentication provides true phishing resistance in our modern evolving cyber threat landscape. Next slide, please. And so this is one such study that Google actually did, where they, and I apologize for the formatting here, but you get the main idea. They tried 350,000 hijacking attempts, and essentially you can see the effectiveness of all of these different methods in having accounts being taken over. It was only security keys, hardware portable security keys based on modern FIDO protocols that was able to deliver 0% risk of account takeovers and stop phishing in their tracks. So all of these methods will have various levels of protection, still better than simple or even complex passwords. But this gives you the idea of the range of options and the range of effectiveness. Next slide, please. So here we'll kind of recreate the scenario that we did previously, where it was legacy MFA versus using modern MFA with FIDO. So again, we start with the same process. User gets a phishing email from a malicious actor. So then after that, if you click next again, Lucas, they supply username and password. Except in this case, the victim also has, you can use FIDO security keys to add an additional layer of protection over your username and passwords as part of a multi-factor, kind of a layered approach. So the user supplies it to the attacker then presents that to the website, except in this case, the website has upgraded to using FIDO protocols, and the website simply asks for FIDO-based authentication. That's something that the user would need to supply with a physical hardware security key. Of course, in this case, the attacker doesn't have the key, and the user is not even bothered. The user never even gets a prompt to do something. And so as a result of the user not having to take any action and the attacker not having the FIDO-based security key and cannot supply that extra bit of information, the real site is not phished, and the final click, the attacker is not able to get into the account. So it's this handshake, the secret handshake that needs to happen between the real website and the FIDO security key, which only the user has, and it's hardware based, so it's not, there's nothing that the user can intercept remotely. It thwarts the attack, so it just kind of breaks the flow. Next slide, please. In fact, very recently, earlier this year, Apple issued an announcement and a directive to say that security keys strengthens Apple's two-factor authentication by requiring a hardware security key as one of the two factors. This basically takes the two-factor authentication that Apple already supplies, but adds that layer of protection. Depending on your scenario, if you would like to have that additional protection, it prevents an advanced attacker from obtaining a user's second factor through a phishing scam. So we're just seeing as awareness enhances in the market out there, as cyber attacks kind of start to really spike, which started through COVID and has continued on, we're starting to see all of our partners and platforms start to invoke this message as well and drive awareness. Next slide. So key takeaway is move away from passwords, think about MFA, think about the range of MFA options, think about your use case and what level of protection you would like to have. And definitely, if you haven't already done so, consider a portable FIDO smart card based hardware security key in the mix to bring that phishing resistant protection into your life and work. Next slide. So then we kind of move on to passwordless. So we've talked about the trials and tribulations with passwords, MFA as a way to mitigate those risks, modernizing your MFA, And then we kind of get into this world where, what if you were to go passwordless altogether? Why would we want to go passwordless? Because passwords involve a lot of overhead. For yourself as a user, you have to change it every so often. You have to make it longer and longer over time. You have to figure out a way to manage them. But for the organization, for those of you who are representing organizations where you're thinking about management of passwords at scale, it's a massive overhead for the IT department to urge users to change their passwords, do it every 60 to 90 days. And then, after all of that, a user may still get locked out of their accounts, call the IT help desk, which is an expensive motion, and the hours and dollars spent in creating and managing passwords. So imagine if you had a passwordless world, it would be doing away with all this overhead, all of this management for individuals and organizations alike, and moving to a more efficient but highly secure way to have a relationship with your accounts and account logins. So that's really the reason why this move to passwordless authentication has taken hold as time has gone on. Next slide, please. And so going to a passwordless state is a bit of a journey. For an individual, if you are using passwords, you want to go to MFA, a system where you're using SMS at the very least, using mobile authentication apps. That's a step forward from using passwords. For organizations where their users, massive number of users are using passwords, again, we would like you to consider moving to MFA. Once you've come to MFA, if you're already at MFA and you're using legacy MFA, then the next part of the journey is moving into phishing resistant MFA. Consider some of the things that I've already mentioned, which is think about your MFA options. Is it smart card or based on FIDO to modern authentication protocols? That is really where you kind of go into true phishing resistance in your journey. And once you've set yourself up that way, then you're ready to go into a passwordless mode, because modern FIDO security keys based on modern protocols not only get you to phishing resistance, but should you be ready for it as an individual or even as a user to go into passwordless authentication, you're now well set up to go into passwordless mode in the future. So it's not a one size fits all, it's a journey. You can take several hops to it, but know that if you, over time, the industry and organizations are more and more going to passwordless authentication built on top of modern phishing resistant MFA to just remove away the ills of passwords and all the costs and breaches associated with it. Next slide. So what is a passwordless user experience? The whole idea is to make it frictionless for the user. So in some cases, depending on you as an individual, if you have a modern FIDO security key that can do tap and go and you're registered to a particular service, you would just tap and go. There's nothing to enter. For an organization where you have compliance mandates and complex systems, and you as an organization want to have a policy where you'd like users to put in a simple PIN. And PINs, by the way, are different than passwords because PINs don't have to change that often. Passwords do. Think about your debit card. When was the last time you changed the PIN on your debit card? Probably has been a really long time. So a PIN is a much shorter number of characters. Some companies may want you to just put in your PIN and touch a FIDO security key to establish user presence, and boom, you're in. So that is an example of a passwordless user experience. There are many other examples, but that just gives you a flavor of it. But modern FIDO-based security keys will give you that experience, whether you're an individual or you're thinking of your organization and coming at it from that perspective, and bring that passwordless experience to a large number of users at scale. Next slide. So one of the examples of a modern FIDO-based security key is the YubiKey. The YubiKey has been seeing steady growth. It offers a true phishing resistance and gives you a bridge to passwordless, and basically sets you as an individual up. If you have a single YubiKey or you get a backup YubiKey, whether you're doing it as an individual or you're thinking of modern MFA for your organization, YubiKeys are the type of YubiKey that security key that we've seen organizations use more and more, as well as individuals. Next slide. So just to close things out, if you go to the next slide, Lucas, I'll just leave you with a few thoughts. If you're an individual listening in, you probably have a variety of accounts that you log into on any given day. Could be work accounts, could be personal accounts. You go back and forth. Ideally, you look for an MFA solution that can work across the range of your devices, that can work across the platforms that you use. You may have a Windows machine and an iPhone. And so think about the range of devices and the range of platforms you kind of traverse on any given day. Look for a solution that can help you go seamlessly and securely across the types of devices that you love, the types of accounts, personal and work, that you want to traverse. If you're someone listening in and you're thinking for your organization, think about your systems that you have, legacy, on-premises systems, modern cloud-based systems, all the different use cases that you need to think about, and look for a modern MFA solution that can provide you that phishing resistance, can help prevent ransomware through stopping credentials being stolen and all these other cyber threat vectors that we're seeing emerging or have been in place. And look for a modern MFA solution that can mitigate against all of these different scenarios that you're thinking about. And I think the next slide is my last slide. For those who are thinking from an organizational standpoint, think past privileged users. So an old adage has been, we're going to provide the strongest levels of security for just a handful of people who may be the super IT admin who has access to a variety of systems, very sensitive systems, or just the executives, and there are privileged users. However, what we're seeing is, when a breach happens, suddenly with heightened awareness, whether it happens to a peer of yours in the industry or to yourself, suddenly everyone is a privileged user. So while it's perfectly okay, and we recommend moving away from passwords and using a mix of MFA options, think through the trade-offs, think through all the systems your users have access to, and then put the solutions or solution in place that mitigate against those risks. And with that, I will pass things back over and take Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Abby. I'll also ask Lisa to come back on. Awesome. So if anybody has any questions, please put them into the Q&A box. We got some already from some registrants. So I'm going to, we have a question here, and I'll actually start with Abby. What recommendations are available for going passwordless as a school system, particularly for younger students?
Yeah, that's a great question. Education is one of the key industries that we're seeing really ramp up with looking at MFA options, moving beyond passwords, which is fabulous. Again, for students, one of the things that we have helped a lot of educational institutions from K through 12 and beyond is, especially since if there's shared workstations where students are coming in and kind of logging in, logging out, or even their own devices, if they have dedicated devices, the idea of portable modern security keys are very popular because oftentimes if you have MFA on your phone and the phone gets lost, it's a lot more expensive to replace the phone versus a $20, $30 security key, for example. So I would say move beyond passwords as the first guidance. Look at your range of MFA options. Think of the different platforms and devices that your students are using and your use case. For shared workstations, portable security keys work great. That's what we're seeing institutions use. And that then sets you up to go into a passwordless mode where you can kind of look at the back end and work with authentication experts and deliver that simple passwordless experience for users so they can log in, log out of common devices or do have the same experience on their own device.
Great, thank you. We're getting a lot of questions about what happens if you lose your security key or your FIDO key if something happens to it?
That is probably one of our biggest questions, most popular questions that we get. And it's a good question. So people are often worried that if they drop the key falls out of their pocket, can someone get into their accounts? So the first kind of familiar model is we all have keys. We have our house key, our car key, and oftentimes we have two of those. The security key is no different than any of the other physical keys that we might have. Typically, if you lose the first best practice we always recommend is if you're getting a security key, always get a backup, just like we do with other keys. And that's simply because if you lose a key, then the other keys register to the service. You can much more quickly onboard and gain access to all your accounts. That's just for you as a user. Now, what happens if you lose the key? Every service that you registered your key with, there are processes in place to mitigate against exactly that scenario. And depending on the service that you registered your key with, they will have their own policies to help you recover and get back into your account. So you can easily go in and revoke the old key and invoke the new key. That's one simple way. In some cases, a service might give you an easy way, send you a link to get back into the account. Each service may have its own method. Keep in mind the key that you have, a single key, you can register with hundreds of accounts, and those secrets are never shared between those accounts. So the key has a relationship with each individual service, and each service has a way to get you back into the account and disable the old key.
Great. Lisa, there's a question here that I'll pose to you. How can passwordless authentication protect against cyberbullying?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that cyberbullying or cyber stalking, I think, Jen, don't we have recorded webinars on both on our website? Mm-hmm. A lot of the advice that applies there also applies is just sort of general good advice. If you have somebody harassing you online, whether it's bullying or stalking, and your passwords are too easy, or you're using the same password on multiple accounts, it's a really good idea to make sure you have, change your passwords and then make sure you have multi-factor authentication in place. When I think about situations where people go through bad breakups, contentious divorces, and you think about the ways to have a password reset, or you're talking about somebody who might know the answers to your security questions, right? If you go through a divorce, chances are your ex knows what your social security number was, for example, or the house you grew up in, the street it was on, or the name of your elementary school, or your first car. So I think having MFA in place can just really help in all those kinds of circumstances where you're in a contentious situation with somebody that you know in real life, not just online, and maybe somebody who was a friend or was a partner and they know a lot about you. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind, like where I think about these issues crossing over. Abby, do you have anything to add to that one? I'll put you on the spot.
No, I think, it's, I agree with everything Lisa said. This is not exactly I guess one could, depending on how you see it, could be a cyberbullying exercise. But in 2020, there was a very famous Twitter breach where a group of 17-year-olds took over people's accounts and went and they did a, double your Bitcoin spam and took over Barack Obama's account, took over Kim Kardashian West's account, Jeff Bezos' account, Elon Musk's account. And I think the key here is you just want to raise the bar for security so that your account cannot be usurped by someone else. And any of the methods, as you move away from passwords and go to stronger forms of MFA, you're mitigating someone else's ability to come in as you and take over your online presence.
There's some really interesting questions coming up,
Jen. So we have a few questions about cost. One person asks, how much should a corporation plan to spend going from a password-based environment to passwordless? And Abby, maybe you can answer that and also touch on what that looks like for a small business as well.
Yes, it kind of comes down to your particular scenario. So, I can't provide any sort of percentages, based on these number of employees, this is how much you should spend. I think a good way to approach it is think through. The first thing for a small business, we know that when a cyber breach happens, it can be quite problematic for a business of any size, but of course a small business, and you want to protect your hard work. So think about the systems that your users are accessing, and maybe start by tackling the most important systems you want to secure and the users that you want to secure. And so that's, instead of, bite off a little bit at a time in terms of addressing your security needs, your MFA, then going to passwordless. One thing to think about is, typically we find organizations these days, and in general, they try to quantify the risk more than they try to quantify the cost. So think of risk reduction in terms, and then cost reduction as a result of that. How much would a breach cost your organization? What that risk would be. One additional point to think about is cyber insurance. This is a big topic right now for organizations in general, of all verticals, certain verticals more than others. As cyber threats have gone up and ransomware has happened, cyber insurance organizations are paying out mass quantities on behalf of their clients to pay off these ransomware asks. What we've found is organizations that are using modern MFA, and the ones that we have the most exposure to, of course, is FIDO-based security keys. They're seeing massive reductions in cyber insurance premium costs. So cyber insurance providers are looking to their clients, i.e. companies, to see what kind of MFA are they bringing in-house. Have they moved away from passwords to even qualify to get cyber insurance? And if they have, great. What type of MFA do they have? And the stronger the MFA that you opt for, the better premium that you get. It's not any dissimilar from, when we buy insurance in our own lives. If you have certain controls and security in place, you may get a better break on your insurance. So I would say, look at your user population, look at which are the most acute systems that you want to protect, who are the highest risk users in your organization, equip them with the stronger forms of MFA. And then you might also see some additional benefits, like a reduction in your cyber insurance premiums and all that. So you can mitigate costs that way as well. I'll leave you with that for now to chew over.
Great. Lisa, I'll pose this next question to you. What steps should users take to minimize risks when using legacy MFA?
I think the most important one, the one that always comes to mind quickest for me, is if you're getting a request for an MFA request and you didn't initiate it, don't touch it. If you get a push notification to an app asking you to respond, and you didn't do anything to try to sign on to that account that's sending you the push notification, if you got any kind of text saying, click here to get into your account, and you weren't the one trying to get in, then absolutely don't do anything. Just delete it. That's the most important thing. Abby, did I miss anything there? Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's basically it. And I think there's this idea of MFA fatigue. One of the things that malicious actors count on is you being a human, stressed, rushed, forgetful, or, I saw that thing come up and let me just take care of it. Right. Those are the behaviors. They're hoping they'll keep hammering away at it until they find a weak point.
Yeah, there was a very highly publicized incident, I don't know, 6 months ago now, maybe, where the attacker just kept sending the text over and over and over again, and then decided to call the person and pretend that they were the help desk and say, hey, I just need you to click on that. You haven't been responding. And unfortunately, the person did. And that created a security incident. So they can be, if they've decided that you're a target, like in that particular instance, they were targeting this individual for the access they had to a large major corporation, then they will be persistent. I mean, they like low-hanging fruit, but if you happen to be between them and something they really want, then they're going to take more time and even involve, the use of a phone call, like in that attack. So no matter how persistent they seem, if you weren't the one trying to sign on, then just ignore it or delete it.
Yes, I'll just add to everything, agree with everything Lisa said. One last thing from my end on that particular topic is something that we don't talk enough about, which is, trust your instinct. If something feels weird, pay attention to that. Yep. And don't do anything. If you get an email, I myself working in cybersecurity have almost fallen for some of these things. If there's a big dollar value, congratulations for buying extra iCloud storage or something like that. You're like, I didn't pay $80 for that. Let me go check. If you have that feeling like I didn't initiate this, just take a moment and step back and then go back and look at it, or call the entity directly rather than accept calls.
Any questions in here, Abby, that you want to take as the last one? Anything? There's a lot of them here to scroll through. I see somebody asking about how they get their, how do they encourage their financial institution to move off of their legacy MFA. Talk to them. Hopefully a lot of businesses are still listening to their consumers. I think it's hard for the leadership in a lot of companies, especially maybe like a small local bank or a regional bank, to understand how important this is to their customers. A lot of times leadership can have an attitude that if it's not broken, we're not going to fix it, or until something bad happens, it's fine the way it is. And that's unfortunate. But I think the more demand there is from customers for better protections, I think I see the market responding more and more to that. If you just look at how some of the larger companies now even talk about security, they promote it, they do advertisements about security and privacy. Those are things that you didn't see marketers do even just a couple of years ago that you see now. And that's based on consumer sentiment and the feeling that this is something that people actually want. So I would talk to them. I would make your preference known as a start.
I have 3 questions that I'm seeing here that I'll just go cover quickly if we have time. So the first question is, what is the advantage of a hardware security key over a FIDO passkey on a mobile device? Great question. So when you think about on our devices, the passkeys, which a FIDO passkey is just a FIDO credential. So think of passkey as just a FIDO credential. So our devices come with FIDO credentials. They're big, modern devices are now starting to come with them. They're great, definitely better than passwords. However, it's only on that platform. So if you are switching between Apple devices to Microsoft devices to Google devices, if you're switching platforms that have multiple devices, the passkeys that come on a device are local to that device oftentimes, or could possibly be local to just that platform. Whereas a portable hardware security key, you can use to establish your identity and verify yourself across a range of devices, across a range of platforms. So it's that portability that makes it, gives you that edge for your day-to-day life. The next question is somewhat tied. And the question was, I have hundreds of accounts. Do I need to have a FIDO security key for this account and another one for that account? And, how would that work? And the way it works is because these security keys have already been integrated in with the variety of thousands of accounts, you only really need the one key that works across all of these accounts. As I'd mentioned before, you register the key to any number of accounts, work or personal, and the secrets are not shared between these services. So each service recognizes that key, but they have their own relationship. So you don't have to carry around 100 keys. You just need the one key, and we recommend a backup key just to have. And that works across a range of all of your accounts. And then how easy is it for an individual to purchase a FIDO key? They're available on Amazon. They're very easy to get your hands on. So they're ubiquitous. It's individuals, Amazon. Think of your regular kind of online retailers. And then, of course, for organizations, it's a different use case. So I would not recommend going through Amazon for that. In that case, please go find an authentication expert to chat with.
Great. So we are unfortunately out of time. I know there are a lot of questions we didn't get to, so I'm going to have Lucas go to the next slide. So if we didn't get to your question, you can contact us. Our information is on the screen. You can email us at info@StaySafeOnline.org. We have a lot of resources available on our website as well, StaySafeOnline.org, and you can follow us on social media. So again, this webinar is recorded. It will be sent to everybody by tomorrow morning. And thank you all for joining today. Thank you, Abby and Lisa, for sharing your expertise and advice. And have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.